Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. I think all of you know me. I'm Bridget Flaherty, the Director of Global Engagement, and I'm going to be talking about CPT today, or Curricular Practical Training, and a couple other things related to student employment as well. Feel free to ask questions throughout if you have them or put them in the chat. Like I said, I'm recording this so other students can watch, but ones who miss it, they might have the same questions you have. So it's good if you can bring them up and I can answer them along the way. So first, I'm just going to go over CPT, but then I'm going to talk a little bit about on-campus employment, Social Security numbers, and a couple of other employment-related situations. So as I think many of you know, CPT is an opportunity for you to gain experience in your field connected to one of your courses while you're still studying. So CPT is something that students do during their program. And here at the Chicago School, many of you are in programs that require internships or practicum, and you will need to do CPT, be authorized for CPT to be able to do those off-campus internships and practicum. So it really, for the F1 visa regulations, it has to be an established part of your curriculum. And for you, when it's a required part of your program, that meets the requirements for CPT. But so I'll go through the process of how you apply for that as well. So you can do either part-time CPT or full-time CPT. And what the F1 rules say is that if you are doing 20 hours or less per week, that counts as part-time. And there's no limit to part-time CPT. If you are doing over 20 hours a week, that counts as full-time. Sometimes students have more than one position, and those will add up to more than 20 hours. So that would count as full-time CPT, even when it's two part-time positions that are combined. And if you do more than a year of full-time CPT, you lose your eligibility to apply for OPT, which is optional practical training. And that's when you can have the opportunity to work in your field after you graduate, and you can apply for that in your final term. So this is something that gets tricky for students in certain programs when you have a required full year, full-time internship. So for instance, the PsyD clinical psychology programs, all students in that have to do a full year of full-time CPT. But what we do is we work with you and your site to see if you can do just a couple days less than that full year to make sure that you're not going to lose your chance to do OPT. And all of our students have been able to do this. It hasn't been an issue to just take a couple days off to make sure you can still do that. But for any of you that are in those programs, what I want you to keep in mind is that up until that final year internship, you must do only part-time CPT. Otherwise, you are going to end up going over that full year. Does anyone have questions about this part? So the process to apply for CPT, you do have to be enrolled in one of those internship or practicum courses. And we do have a CPT application form, and I can share these slides with all of you so you can go directly to that link for the form. You would sign that, and your academic advisor would sign that as well. And then also you will need an offer letter from your company. And we do have on our application form, we have a template letter. And so if your site might have their own version of an offer letter, and as long as it includes the required details we need, we can accept that. But if they don't have that, or if they would prefer using our template, that's what we have that there for. Because basically they need to be saying when you're going to start and end your internship, how many hours you're doing, so we can confirm as if it's full-time or part-time, your supervisor, your employment site, whether you're working remotely or in person. So those are the types of things that are on the template that they can make sure to include in the letter. And so we ask that you would gather together that application form and your offer letter and send that to us at least 2 weeks before you will start the internship or practicum. We typically have over 60 students every semester doing CPT, and it takes some time for Charlene and I to go through and do all of those approvals and get your new I-20s to you. So that's why we ask that you give it to us a couple weeks ahead of time. So also if you're missing anything, if you need an adjustment to the letter, we can work with you on that, and you have some time to make those fixes. So what we do once we have those documents and we can confirm that you've registered for the course that you need, then we will go into CVIS and we will add your CPT and we'll send you an updated I-20. Every time we send you a new I-20, you need to make sure that you sign the student attestation that's at the bottom of page 1 because your I-20 is not valid without it. We'll typically remind you of this, but I just want to remind you of that now too, to make sure that you've signed that. And that can be signed, whether you print it out and sign it by hand, you can sign it electronically or digitally, that's okay as well. And then you should always provide a copy of your I-20 with the CPT on it to your employer. When you're on CPT, usually most employers have an HR office that wants to see proof that you can legally work for them in the US. And on CPT, you don't have any other document than that I-20 that shows the CPT authorization. So that's why you'll want to provide that to them so they can see that you're allowed to be doing that internship or practicum. And it's important to remember that you cannot start working until you have that I-20 with a CPT authorization with that start date on it. If you do start without that, it's considered being out of status. It's considered working without authorization, and that goes against the F1 regulations. Any questions about the application process? Okay. And a couple more things related. We do have to authorize it per semester. So you will have to be enrolled in a corresponding internship or practicum course every semester that you're going to have that CPT authorization. And so when we authorize you, like for this coming fall, we'll remind you that you need to get in touch with us again before the spring semester starts if you're going to be continuing in that same position so we can authorize you again. We don't need a new employer letter. If you have one letter that says that you'll be working for a full year with the same employer, we just need a new CPT application that's specific for the semester. It will include the course that you're taking, and then we'll be able to do that authorization and get you that new I-20 for the new semester. And make sure, like one thing that we do when you're overlapping over multiple semesters, when we authorize you for the fall, we can do it up until the day before the spring term starts. So it will cover kind of the gap between the two semesters. And then the same thing in the spring, we can have it cover the gap between the spring and summer semester as well. So we do it along those lines so you won't have any gap in your authorization to work. Any questions about this piece? Yeah,
I have a quick question. You mean
yeah,
to say the gap of 3 weeks, like the winter break that comes between the fall semester and the spring semester, those
yes.
3 weeks are covered in the very first CPT for the CPT authorization that starts for the fall semester?
Yep. As long as you're continuing, like, so if you provided us a letter that said you're starting this date in August and you're working until the following July,
Got
then
it.
we'll make sure that you're covered for that gap between the fall and spring. And then we'll need the new application from you to get you started again in the spring semester.
So for the new application, you just have to refill the application form with the signature from the department chair and me or whoever the CPT person is. That's it.
Right. So
Okay.
usually the main difference in the application is whatever the course number is that you're taking for that particular term, the term itself, and then the new signatures from you and your advisor.
Okay, and I also had like a quick question. I think we as international students, we need to maintain 6 credits. However, the practicum and seminar is considered 3 credits. What if we only have to take the practicum and seminar and we're already or almost done with the electives?
So it depends, but many of our programs, and I'm not sure about yours, I'd have to check, but many of them, the practicum and internship courses are auto full-time. Some aren't. Some I know are only 3 credits, but some of them are auto full-time, so you can only take that. But if in your case, if it is a 3 credit practicum, and then you don't have anything else that you're required to take, you would still have to meet that 5 credit minimum unless it's your final semester. because when it's your final semester, we could authorize you for a reduced course load. But if it's not, you would have to take an additional class to meet that minimum of 5 credits for the semester.
So how would I come to know? Because I I'm not sure.
I mean, if you want to follow up with me later and we can look
Okay.
into that directly, but
Okay.
all in general, you can look at the catalog, and for your program in the catalog, it will actually say how many credits any of your courses count, including the practicum, internships, seminars, dissertation thesis. All of those will say if a specific number of credits, auto half-time, auto full-time, you'll see one of those things listed there.
Got it. So it's
Yeah.
then the handbook the MACP catalog.
Well,
The
it's the
course.
Chicago School catalog that, and or like also it includes the student handbook that it has each program of study listed in it. Any other questions on this piece? Okay, so let's see here. One thing to remember is that you are required to have CPT authorization, whether a position is paid or unpaid. Just because a position is unpaid doesn't mean that it would count as like volunteering community service, because you are allowed to do community service without needing CPT authorization. So just to keep that in mind, that if it's something that you're doing as an internship or practicum and it's unpaid, you still need that CPT authorization. And if you ever have a question on whether or not something could count as community service versus an unpaid internship, just ask Charlene or I, and we can help you look into that and see which one it would meet. Um, and if you will have an on-campus job at the same time as you're doing CPT, the two combined cannot exceed 40 hours per week. So if you're going to be working in an on-campus job for 20 hours per week, you're limited to 20 hours of CPT per week and doing that part-time. If you're doing full-time CPT and it's going to 30 hours, then you could do 10 hours of on-campus work. So just that's one of the questions we ask on the CPT application, because we want to help you keep an eye on that and make sure you won't go over that 40 hours per week.
Sorry, I have one more question.
Yeah.
Uh, if we're dividing 40 hours between practicum and an on-campus job, what if we do 20 hours or a little beyond 20 hours of CPT? Does that count towards OPT, or does that kind of, is it okay?
So that's a good question, because this is something that comes up sometimes as students wonder if they could have like one week where they're full-time CPT and other weeks where they're part-time. We can only authorize for the entire semester. And so if you're authorized for part-time CPT, every week has to stay at 20 hours or below and can't go over that. If you're going to be working over 20 hours per week periodically throughout a semester, we'd have to authorize you for full-time CPT for that semester. Does that answer your question?
So you have to qualify only for, I mean, I should be doing like only half-time CPT to be qualified for OPT next year. Does that
It
make sense?
will, I mean, if you haven't done any full-time CPT yet, you could do just under 1 full year of full-time CPT and still be eligible for OPT. So like if you were to do full-time CPT this fall and spring,
Mm.
you haven't done a full year yet. That would only be close to 8 months, I think, eight
Okay.
and a half months. So
Okay.
you'd still be okay for OPT.
Okay. No, because I have like personally, I have like a lot of criterias. I need 1,000 hours, so I need to be like under the 20-hour limit. And I'm also holding a job in school. So, okay, cool. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and if that's what I'd say is just making sure if you are going to do full-time CPT that you're between that and your on-campus work that you keep that below 40. Yeah. Let's see here. Oh, and we can't backdate CPT authorization. So we can only authorize it for a future date. There's no function in CBIS that allows us to backdate it. So that's another important reason to make sure that you do this with us ahead of time. Because if you're wanting to start, what's tomorrow, July 10th. If you're wanting to start on July 10th, we can authorize July 10th today and tomorrow. But once it's July 11th, we can't authorize July 10th anymore. So we can never backdate that CPT start date in CBIS. Okay. So next, I'm
Um,
going to talk a little bit about on-campus employment, unless anyone has another CPT question.
I have a quick question with regards to volunteering.
Mhm.
Would that so if you're volunteering for the community, for example, it's let's say something completely unrelated, like helping with cooking or um you know with the homeless or something like that, would we need to have you sign an authorization for us to do that, or it's something that we can just go ahead and do when it comes to, volunteering that has nothing to do with our field of study?
Right. Yeah. If it's true volunteer work like that, like working at a homeless shelter, something along those lines, you don't need authorization from us. I think sometimes it can be helpful just for you and your paperwork and having proof of things to have a letter from the organization saying that you're doing purely volunteer work and community service, because it shows that you don't need that authorization. And if it is something that you're unsure if it counts as true service work, check with me and I can help you with that. But it is things I'd say like working at a homeless shelter, doing something like tutoring kids after school. That's a volunteer free thing, no one's paid for. Helping to clean up a local park or a trail system, like things like that, where it's always volunteer. No one gets paid to do that. You wouldn't get any kind of internship or practicum credit. Those, typically would fall under that volunteering. That's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have one question. So with this CPT I-20 form that we'll get, what's the traveling restriction if we have any? If we want to like in winter we want to go back home or something.
Right. There's not any traveling restrictions with CPT. It's just the same as, when you're normally just studying and have your regular I-20, that you would need to make sure that you have our signature on page 2 on that travel signature page. That's recent, at least from within the last year. And then you would need to make sure you have, your valid passport and visa to return as well. But otherwise, you're traveling within the CPT authorization dates, as long as your internship employer is okay with you being on those days, that doesn't matter. It's fine for you to travel then.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah,
I have a question about the
sure.
starting day. So, my sites actually start at July the 1st, but I take a break, like a 3 weeks break. Like I will start my actually for me, I will start until like August. So when I ask for the confirmation letter from my prac, do I ask like them to specifically for me to say, oh, I start at July the 1st, or still I can say like starting from July, no, August the 1st, and they say like, oh, the prac actually start at July the 1st, and I start work in August. Like how's that works?
Yeah, it's best if they can put the date that you're actually starting, because that's what we would need to authorize. Um, because otherwise, if your letter said you start July 1st and your I-20 says you're starting on August 1st, then it would look like you are working for a month without authorization. So that's why it's important for your employer letter to match the dates that we're able to authorize you for. Does that make sense?
Oh yes, yes. But also I was wondering for the program if there's any like month we have to work for like to be eligible for the require whatever. I mean, like, is there any like requirement for the prac, like for the program to meet? Like,
I mean,
if
that
I'm making
depends
any sense.
on your specific program, because that's a bit different for each program. So it's best to talk to your like faculty advisor to see, or the director of clinical training for your program, to determine what the requirements are and when you would need to start. But just make sure, and I know it's hard because all of you as international students, you have to work with your department and you need to work with us as your international student advisors and figure all of this out. But just make sure that once you've confirmed with your department when you need to start working, and your site has confirmed that you do the CPT process with us before your start date, so we can get that on there and have you authorized.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other CPT questions? Okay, I'll just talk a little bit about on-campus employment. I think at least I know some of you here already have on-campus jobs, so probably already know this, but if any of you are still thinking about that or looking for jobs, that you are allowed to be employed on campus without any kind of additional authorization, but you're only eligible for the college work study positions. So you will see when you look in Handshake for an on-campus position, some are listed as federal work study. Those ones are funded by money from the US federal government. And so they're only open to US citizens, permanent residents, and not for anyone who's here in a visa status like F1. But the college work study or CWS, those are the positions that you can apply for. And it doesn't matter if it's related to what you're studying because it's different than CPT or OPT. It can be any type of position, any department that's on campus. It can also include remote positions. So some of our offices do have those remote positions that you could do from any campus working for a department. So know that you can apply for those as well. So you are allowed to work up to 20 hours per week total for a combination of positions. Sometimes we have students that have a couple of different college work study positions, and the combined total can't go over 20 hours a week. And that does include during any official university breaks. Technically, the F1 rules say that during any vacation period between terms that you could work over 20 hours per week and be full-time, but the Chicago school has a policy for all students that you're limited to 20 hours per week. So just to be aware of that rule. And you can only work while you're still in valid F1 status as an active student. So what that means is that if you're going to be graduating and you have that program end date, you can't work beyond that. Like, so if you are applying for OPT and you have a gap of time between when your program ends and your OPT will start, you can't work during that gap period. It's only when you're still an active student up until that program end date. And we do have an on-campus student employment letter that there's a link to it in the slides that I'll share. And that's something that when you get an on-campus job, your supervisor should fill that out and then you send that to our office. And I'll talk in a minute about Social Security, but that letter is something you would use to apply for Social Security. But even if you already have your Social Security number, we still want to have that on file just so we can help keep track of which of you are working on campus. Any questions about on-campus employment? Okay, then a little bit about Social Security. Basically, you are not eligible for a Social Security number as an F1 student until you have a paid position. And so any of you that get an on-campus job, then you're able to apply for a Social Security number because that is a paid position. Because basically the Social Security numbers are used to track income in the US, and that's why it's tied to whether or not it's a paid position, and determine any benefits. Really, the benefits are for people who are citizens who are here because you end up getting money from Social Security when you retire, when you're a certain age. But that's in general how Social Security numbers are used here. And if you do get a paid internship or practicum and don't yet have an SSN, you'll be able to apply for it at that point. And then if any of you go your entire time during your degree without an SSN and then you apply for OPT, you can actually apply for it at the same time. There's a part of the OPT application that lets you apply for it at that time. If you already have it, then you just indicate what that number is when you apply for OPT. So I know sometimes it can be frustrating because students will need a Social Security number sometimes for like a housing application or a background check for an internship site. And if you don't have one and you don't have a paid position, you can't get one. So if this does come up for some of you, if like a background check, technically they can do background checks using other identity information without the Social Security number. And your specific site might not have had experience with that, but you can ask about that. Like let them know it is possible. There are ways in those background check systems to do this. And I know because we've had many students do it without a Social Security number. But I do know that sometimes that can be difficult. But just so you're aware, if there's any way that you're able to get even just a couple hour a week paid job on campus that could help you get a social security number, that could be a big help to you just so you don't run into those types of roadblocks along the way. Once you do have an offer for a paid position, you can apply up to 30 days ahead of time of that start date. They won't let you apply further out than that. So like if you do get a paid internship offer and it's not starting for a couple of months, you'll have to wait till you're within that 30-day period to start the application process. So this is the basic process that you send your offer letter to our office. So if it's for one of the on-campus jobs, that would be that template that we have the link to for your on-campus supervisor. If it's going to be for an off-campus site for CPT, then we would use that employer letter that you receive from them. And then we have our own SSN support letter that we would provide to you. So you would take both of those to go into your local Social Security office, along with these other documents that are listed here. And that includes the Social Security application form, which there's links to that on our website as well. And it usually takes a few weeks, I think, these days to get a Social Security card in the mail. And I would also just say that those cards are then tied to your identity. And it's very important to not lose the card and not have your Social Security number listed in places if it's not necessary or required, because that's how identity theft happens. People can steal your identity, open up credit cards, open up, accounts and things like that in your name if they have your Social Security number. So be very careful with that. And you can even continue to use the same Social Security number if you leave the US and let's say 5 years down the road, you come back and are doing another degree or something like that, you could still keep that same Social Security number. So just keep that with all of your important documents. Questions about Social Security numbers?
I have a question, because you mentioned that the payments go towards retirement for citizens in the US, and I was wondering if we ever obtain citizenship, does it work backwards as well, or whatever we'll make for now?
I actually don't know. I mean, that's a good question that no one's ever asked me before. And I don't know enough about how that would work if it would, like you're saying, if you're paying into Social Security, if you would then be eligible for that if you later get citizenship. I don't know that it would. I know that the Social Security number that you get as an F1 student, like the card you get, it looks different than the card that we get. Like it says something on it about how it's only tied to employment, or I forget what it says, but there's something specific to it for you. I think some of you know who already have a Social Security card. So I think that if you get citizenship, that you actually are often assigned a new and different number and you get a new card that's meant for citizens. So my guess would be that that's when you would be eligible for any of those benefits, would be starting with that citizenship and the Social Security number that's tied to your citizenship. But I can't say that for sure. That's just what I think it's likely that that's how it works.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Someone put something in the chat. Did I? For 5 years. Do you mean like that it's good for 5 years? Is that what you mean, Pamela? Because I think.
Oh, hello. Sorry, I can't. My internet is not so good. I cannot put on my camera, but I listened to you that it could be able or could works for 5 years. We don't have to exchange. I listened to something like if, for example, like I travel and I come back, it will.
I was saying that if you leave the US, like to go home for some number of years, I just said 5 years as an example, and then you come back again as like an F1 student for another degree, my understanding is you can keep that same Social Security card, that you can use that same number. So like if you were to come back later on to save that card and number, because then that time around, you don't have to wait till you have a paid job to get the Social Security card. So it sticks with you. Like typically it sticks with you for life. But if you were to change to be a US citizen, that's when I think you would get a new and different number. But in your like F1 status or in some type of non-immigrant status, you should be able to keep that same social security number if you leave the US for years and then come back and still have it. Sometimes students have done that and they've lost the card and they've had to apply for a new one once they come back. So that is also possible. Okay, so let's see.
Thank you.
Yep,
Okay.
you're welcome. So I think just a couple other things. We talked a little bit already about volunteering. That, like I mentioned, that volunteering, if it's not work that someone is typically paid to do, that would usually count as volunteer work. And there's no expectations of compensation now or in the future. And otherwise, if it doesn't fit that criteria, it would usually be considered unpaid employment. And that's when you need to make sure that you have the CPT authorization. And we do have some information on our website with some volunteer guidelines. And as I mentioned, just always ask me or Charlene if you are unsure if something would count as volunteer work or not. And then there is a specific thing in the regulations that there's these international organizations. If you were to get a position with one of them, that's allowed without needing CPT. There is something though where we actually in CVIS would mark that you're working for one of these international organizations. So you would still work with our office to get that added to your I-20. But just so you're aware of this, if this were to come up for any of you, I saw this sometimes at past schools where we had like international affairs degrees and things that really matched with these types of organizations. I haven't seen this come up yet at the Chicago school, but that's not to say that there might not be an opportunity for one of you where you could get a position for this. So if something like this comes up for you, just work with our office and we'll help you figure that out if you could be authorized for that position.
Does the position need to be in your field of study, or can it be like anything?
It could be anything. It would be like an internship position. And most likely they'd want to hire you because of your specific expertise. And that, it is possible that they would need that at one of these organizations. So, but it's not like CPT and OPT where it needs to be directly related to what you're studying. It's just if one of these, like, let's say the UN wanted to hire you for an internship position, that would fall under this.
Is there like a time limit or a couple of hours only that we can work, or there is no restriction on the
That's
number
a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that because I haven't had a student do this before. So I would say if that comes up for you, we can look into that together and see if there was a restriction on the amount of time, like the hours per week. Yeah, it's a
I
good
hope
question.
so.
Yeah. Okay, and then just a little bit about one final way of type of work that some students end up doing. This is if something changes after you've been in the US for a full year, if something changes and you have something where if let's say your family is helping to fund your stay here and help you pay for things, and your parents lose their job or your spouse loses their job, or there's a natural disaster that has caused economic hardship. There's been a significant change in the currency conversion between US dollars and your home currency. There's different things like this that if they happen and it makes it so that you no longer have that funding that when you first came you had, you can apply for economic hardship and being allowed to work through economic hardship. So the process is similar to applying for OPT, where USCIS actually has to approve it. You would work with me or Charlene because we have to go in to see this and mark that that's what you're applying for. And then you have to submit documents and any proof you have to show the change in your financial situation. But if they approve it, you're approved for 12 months to work off campus, and it's any type of work. So it could be you working at like a local coffee shop or restaurants, whatever it might be. That you could do any type of work with this type of employment authorization, because it's really just meant for you to be earning money to help pay your way, pay for your studies, pay for your cost of living. Any questions about this? Okay. Well, that's basically it. We've covered CPT and then the other things related to
I
them.
have a question.
Yeah, Greta.
No? Oh, okay. So I know that you have the OPT time to work without having to be sponsored in the US and stuff, but are there resources where the Chicago school helps you even after you graduated to find employment? I'm just a little worried that, you have to get a certain amount of hours done under supervising, and if that doesn't happen and I don't find work, then I have to go back, but I'm not yet fully licensed and all of that, how that works.
So like looking for employment while you're on OPT or like when you're getting ready to start OPT, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, basically what I'd say a couple of different things. I'd say to already start working with our career center to look into different options, even if you're still a little ways out, even a couple of years out from OPT. So you can start like talking to them about what are some different options for OPT related to your specific program. And they have some things that you can use resources like on Handshake where you can actually filter when you look for positions and employers. You can filter for only ones that will are willing to hire students on OPT, ones that are willing to sponsor students for a visa, if you're hoping to get sponsored for like an H-1B after OPT. So there's some different resources like that with them. I also recommend speaking with people in your department and seeing if you can connect with any maybe recent alumni of the types of positions or organizations that have hired them that are related. So it's often things along those lines, like trying to network and do that early on so you can start to look into some different options. I know it can be hard sometimes when you have those like hours and licensure hours that you have to complete, that it might be hard to do that. So that's why I say to look into that early on to see if you could find a potential employer that you could start with for OPT, and maybe you could find sponsorship if you want to continue beyond that. Yeah, Havobi.
I just thought I can answer Greta's question about, connecting with potential OPT. Right after we finish, there is a Going Global seminar. If you want to attend, they really go in depth about jobs and international students, H-1B, OPT. So, I mean, I can send you the link. I'll put it up in the chat if I find it. But yeah, feel free to attend that. I am going to be doing this right after the class. So I just thought I'll share it after we finish over here. So I just thought I'll share that with you.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah, if you could share the link in the chat, that would be good.
I will. I hope, yeah, I will try and do that. Could I ask a question, Brittany?
Yeah.
So my question would be, after I finish the practicum and internship, how many months do I have in between to look for an OPT position?
So basically the way it works is that once you have your program end date, you have a 60-day grace period after you graduate. And your OPT, because I always recommend applying for OPT though early if you can. So you can apply up to 3 months before your program end date, but you can choose for your OPT to start anytime in that 60-day grace period. So if you want more time to be looking for work, you could choose it towards the end, and then it gives you a little bit, that basically gives you about 2 months of time when you're done with all of your school requirements, but you are still looking for work. But sometimes students want it to start earlier if they found an employer, and then they want to start working as soon as they can. So it really varies by student.
Okay, so let me be a little more clear. This is my understanding. You want to apply for OPT, that has to be done about 3 or 4 months earlier.
You're allowed to apply 3 months
Okay.
before your end date.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when you're applying for OPT, do you have to mention a fixed date that you have in mind to
Yep.
start the OPT?
Yep. Yeah. So
And
that's often, yeah.
And then do you have to start on that bang on date?
Once your OPT starts, because yeah, like you do have to choose when you want your OPT to start when you apply. But then once that date comes, you do have 90 days that you could be unemployed on your 12 months of OPT. And so if the start date comes and you don't have a job yet, you can still continue looking for work. But if you reach that 90 days then you're out of F1 status and you either have to leave or, start a new program or do something like that.
Got it. So if I apply for OPT, let's say before I finish my practicum and internship, I get my OPT. I get my EAD, the authorization card. However, I plan to start, let's say, after 2.5 months. Do I lose out those 2.5 months? Are they counted in those 12 months or they are exclusive of 12 months?
Well, I mean, once your start date on your card comes, and if then you're not working for 2.5 months, that's taking away from the 12 months. That's 2.5 months that you've lost and you're not working. Is that what you're asking?
Sort of. So for example, if we this time the graduation was end of June, correct? Now, if I mention when I'm applying for OPT that I want to start in the month of August, however, for some reason, I cannot start working 1st of August, but I start working 1st of September or middle of September. Is August counted as that 1 month in the 12 months?
Yeah. Yep.
Or it actually starts when I physically get to work?
Nope, the 12 months starts when on that approval date. So what happens, like if you choose August 1st is your OPT start date, when your card arrives in the mail, it's going to say August 1st, 2025 to July 31st, 2026. It's going to be those set dates. And so your end date of July 31st is not going to move if you don't work for a couple months. You're losing a couple months of your 12 months by not working.
And that cannot be adjusted in any format?
No.
So
only for the students that are in the industrial and organizational psychology programs who are eligible for the
STEM.
2-year
That's
STEM.
clear. Come on.
No, I know. I'm just saying that for anyone who's here who's in a STEM degree, just so they know that they can have another 2 years of OPT. But unfortunately, the rest of you, it's the 12 months and that's set and you can't do an extension.
Now, the 3 months that are going to, we're allowed to stay unemployed for 3 months. Do the 3 months start from the date of graduation or when your course is completed?
It starts from your, it's basically when your course is completed. It's not, so like if you're graduating at the end, like you said, end of June, like that'd be the end of summer.
Graduation is 28th of June. This is what we had last 2 weeks.
Right.
If I graduate on 28th of June, do I get 3 months from the 28th of June where I've graduated, or do I get 3 months from the date my course ended, for example, 15th of June?
Well, it depends. Like if you're, because this does vary by student, but if you're finishing and you're doing a summer 1 course, then really it's the end of summer 1. It's not based on the graduation date though. It's based on the end of summer 1, which I think was June 30th this year. So like it's whatever that end of term date is for you. Yeah. Some students are doing like a dissertation or a thesis where they end up finishing midway through a term. And so that's their end date. So it's never the graduation date. It's always based on when you're actually finishing your course.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to know, because sometimes we've had people graduate and then they're still continuing, but they've met like 99% of the course requirements and they were able to graduate. However, I mean, they're still kind of wrapping up a few things. So that's what I wanted to just clarify.
And if you have gone to one of our OPT workshops yet, I'd recommend doing that too, because that's where we'll really focus on all of these types of issues too.
Yeah, okay. Those dates are like so confusing. Okay, this sounds good.
I know the dates do get confusing for sure, but just keep connecting with us and we'll help you through the process and help you figure out the dates for your situation. And let's see, Funbo.
So that means, sorry, I'm asking, wait. Sorry, I just have like one question. So when do you apply? When do you 3 months or 6 months before you finish your internship for your EAD card or the OPT?
Well, if when you say finish your internship, you mean that's when you're finishing your degree, like we're talking about your program end date. You can apply 3 months ahead of that program end date.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So Fanbo, I will share the slides after this, and it includes a link to the CPT information that has that template on it for that letter. I think that's what you're asking for your employer template letter.
I have a last question. Sorry.
Yeah.
You talk about at the final about a specific word. You can work in any place if you have any financial problem when you have been studying 1 year. Um, you can work 20 hours or 40 hours in any place.
Oh, the economic hardship application, is that what you're asking about? Like,
Yes, yes,
okay.
yes.
I believe that there's not a limit to those hours, but that's another one of those that I'd want to double check. Yeah, and like, so if you decided to follow that process, then we can definitely look into that too. Any other questions? And I do see there's a question about not getting a social security number when you're not working in school. That's you have to have a paid position to apply for a social security number. They won't let you apply for one otherwise. And so when people are asking for like needing a credit score, things like that, even if you were able to get a brand new social security card, it's not really tied. Social security number is not really tied to your credit score when it's brand new like that. So usually there's ways like just ask whoever is asking you for a social security number. You can tell them, you know, I'm an international student and I don't have one and I'm not eligible for one right now. Is there anything else, like any other option, other information I can provide to see if there's another thing that you can do? And yeah, thanks, Havovi, for sharing that. There's the Going Global link. And that was the other thing I was going to mention earlier when she brought that up, that we do try, whenever we hear about those, we try to include those in our monthly newsletter that we send out. So keep an eye on that too for when, because they have those pretty regularly, those sessions that are specifically about H-1B and getting sponsored for visas and working in the US.
It's there in your international email. So if you guys just go into your email, type international in this time's newsletter, you guys have included it.
Yeah.
The DSO has included that information. So yeah, for anybody who needs it, please feel free to join.
Yeah, thank you. Any other final questions? I'll stop.